Excuse me, apologies. Okay, so we might start with the session today, and as always, thanks very much everyone for coming along. If you do have any questions during the session, please feel free to put them into the Q&A feature, and we'll try and answer those as they come. So for the session today, what we're looking to cover is basically just to talk a bit about Turnitin, which is M2's plagiarism detection system. And I suppose what we're going to try and look at is the main kind of features and functions of the Turnitin system, and in particular, looking at how you can integrate it into assignments which you create in Canvas, how you can get analysis reports from Turnitin for student submissions, and how you can interpret those. And then generally just a couple of recommendations, just kind of tips and tricks on how to use Turnitin as effectively as possible. So like I said, if you do have any questions, please do feel free to put them into the Q&A feature if you're joining here in Zoom. And if you're watching online on YouTube, please feel free to put any questions into the live chat there. So, excuse me. In terms of what Turnitin is a web-based plagiarism detection system. So Turnitin essentially takes student submissions, which are uploaded to Canvas assignments, and basically checks those to see if any of the content, which is in the student submissions, appears in other work. And it compares across a broad range of sources. So it looks to existing web sources, to publications and journals, but also to submissions from other institutions using Turnitin. So any institution using Turnitin, student submissions to any and every Turnitin instance can be added, I suppose. It's almost like this gigantic database that any and all work is checked against. So the main avenue to access and Turnitin here in MTU is through Canvas. So it's fully integrated into the Canvas system, and it's available for use by MTU lecturers and students across all modules. So if this is the digital ecosystem that we use here in the Cork campus, you can see Turnitin is part of the Canvas functionality under the whole assessment area. So I suppose the best way to maybe kind of take a look at this is to simply just dive into integrating or showing Turnitin. So if I decide that I want to be able to check student submission work against Turnitin examples, what I can very simply do is I can go to my Canvas module and I can create an assignment. So if I click on the blue Create Assignment button here, usual standard practice, we'll give this a name. So Turnitin test Jan 25. Can give it a description in here, add in the brief, so on and so forth. Can set the number of points that I want it to be available to, so on and so forth. Now, the main consideration in terms of being able to access Turnitin within the Canvas system is very simply that the option to use Turnitin will not appear unless I set the submission type to online and I select either text entry or file upload. So you can see when I select text entry or file upload, what appears down here is the option for plagiarism review. So if I turn those off, plagiarism review disappears. So if at first you're setting up an assignment and you're worried that you can't see the option for Turnitin anywhere, very simply, that is just because it requires you to select the submission type to be online and then select text entry or file upload. And then you'll have the option here for plagiarism review. Now, under plagiarism review, there is a drop-down with two options available. One is original, the other is Turnitin. Now, original is the previous plagiarism detection system that we were using in MTU. It's a long and very boring story, but essentially we were effectively stuck with original for a little while, but we have since been able to use Turnitin, which is the plagiarism detection system of choice. So original is still available in the system, mainly just so we can retain any student submissions that were uploaded under original. So those have been imported into kind of MTU's Turnitin database over the past while. But for any plagiarism detection that you want to do, you simply select Turnitin. And when you select the option for Turnitin under plagiarism review, there's a number of options that will become available. Now, The first option is store submissions in standard paper repository, institution paper repository, or do not store the submitted papers. Excuse. So what this option essentially indicates is this is you indicating to Turnitin where you want student submissions submitted against this assignment to be stored. So this option is entirely up to yourself. The standard paper repository essentially is the you can think of this as kind of Turnitin's kind of worldwide database. So if I select standard paper repository, what that means is that MTU student submissions against this particular assignment will be added to Turnitin's kind of global repository of student work. That means that if, for example, a student in Australia whose university is using Turnitin somehow managed to copy from an MTU student's submission, um, if we select store submission in standard paper repository, that Australian institution, their Turnitin instance will pick up on that. So the standard paper repository is essentially kind of the global Turnitin kind of database. Now, if you are not comfortable with MTU students' work being added to that kind of global database, what you can do is select institution paper repository. Institution paper repository is almost just basically like a MTU only database. So that means that kind of student submissions against this assignment will be submitted to a MTU kind of Turnitin database, and any future student submissions will be compared against that institution paper repository, but it won't be added to the global version. So this might be useful, for example, institution paper repository, if, for example, you have the same kind of assessment broadly kind of year on year. What this would do if you submit student work to this is it will ensure that kind of, for example, a student who submits work which was copied from a previous year, Turnitin would pick up on that because it's drawing and checking against the institution paper repository. The final option then is to simply not store the submitted papers. And if this option is selected, what that means is that any submissions which a student gives towards this assignment, Turnitin will check the student submissions against this assignment, but it won't store them. So it won't add it to the kind of global Turnitin database of student submissions, and it won't add it to the MTU database of student submissions. It's not going to store submissions against this particular assignment. So the option is entirely open to yourself which one you would like to select here. Apart from store submissions in, there's compare submissions against, and this indicates what kind of databases you would like to search or compare submissions to this assignment against. So generally what we would recommend is leaving all four of these options checked. And all that means is that Turnitin is going to, any submissions towards this assignment, Turnitin will check it against the global kind of database repository of student work, the MTU repository of student work, against website content, and against periodical journals and publications. So generally we recommend, as a matter of thoroughness, that you, for compare submissions against, you leave all four of those options ticked. It's up to yourself whether you would like, student submissions against this particular assignment to be added to, again, the standard paper repository, which is Turnitin's kind of global database of student work, the institution paper repository, which is just kind of the MTU database, or to not store the submitted papers at all. But yeah, we would recommend kind of comparing submissions against all four. There are a number of options then in terms of a similarity report. So we'll talk a bit about these when we look at an actual Turnitin analysis report. You don't have to worry too much about kind of setting these at this stage, because these are options that you can turn on or off when you're looking at actual student at the Turnitin similarity report, which is going to be produced. An additional option then is whether you want to show the report to students immediately after the assignment is graded, after the due date, or never. Now, this is kind of an important decision for the simple reason that If, for example, we set hypothetically a deadline for the end of this month for this particular assignment, if we decide that we want to show the report to students immediately, what that means is that a student might submit at the end of this week. And if we're going to show the report to them immediately, then the student will be able to, get a plagiarism kind of detection report straight away. So if they submit the end of this week, they might see, okay, this is showing up as 50% plagiarized material. Because the deadline is due for the end of the month, that means that the student will have time to rewrite the content and to resubmit it to try and get that plagiarism detection score down. If we decide that we want to show the report to students only after the assignment is graded or only after the due date or never at all, what that really means is that a student will submit against this particular assignment. They won't get any plagiarism detection report, so they won't get any indicator of how much of their work is showing up as plagiarized material until after I've graded the report, until after the deadline has passed, or never at all. The key element there is if you show the report to students immediately, you are giving them the opportunity for them to see how much of their work is showing up as plagiarized and to potentially resubmit their assignment. So it's giving them that option to to adjust, to kind of resubmit their work, to kind of take it away if it's showing up with a high plagiarism score, change it and resubmit it. If you select any option really other than immediately, you're removing that opportunity for them. So they'll submit their submission against the assignment. They won't get any indication of whether it's showing up as 10% plagiarized work, 50% plagiarized work, 80% plagiarized work until after it's graded, after the due date, or never at all, in which case it is too late. So when you show the report to students is important because it does determine whether the student gets an opportunity to amend their work and to resubmit, or whether they don't have that option. And I suppose the main kind of element to consider there is if you want to offer students that opportunity or you don't. So when all of that is done, we can simply hit on the Save and Publish button. And from here, if we view a student, what happens then is that when a student looks to begin the assignment, they're given standard kind of opportunities in terms of submitting the assignment, but they have to tick on this statement that their assignment submission is their own original work, and also to agree to the Turnitin end user license agreement. So there is that additional step now for them in terms of agreeing that there's to that statement and agreeing to the end user license agreement. But otherwise, the process of submission for a student remains pretty much exactly the same. So what we can do is we can look at an existing example of a Turnitin assignment. So to look at what Turnitin produces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into an example of an assignment that I created earlier. So again, if we just go into this assignment, we can click on the option for SpeedGrader. And it's through SpeedGrader that we can access our Turnitin analysis report. The main place where this will appear, as you'll see here, is the standard SpeedGrader interface is presented in terms of the student, the submission, the original file, so on and so forth. But you'll notice here that there is this kind of percentage score, which is the similarity score now available in SpeedGrader. And very simply, if we want to access the analysis report, we simply click on that percentage number. And what that will do is it will prompt the similarity report and turn it in to open up for us. So what I'm going to do, Nadim, is I'm going to talk a bit about AI detection at the end of the session because there isn't any kind of easy answer when it comes to that. But I'll talk a bit about that later. Excuse me. So Within the Turnitin similarity report section, then basically the student's work is presented over on the left-hand side. We can see the overall similarity indicator up here, and then throughout any part of the content which has been identified as potential plagiarism is highlighted using a variety of colors here. We can see over here in the legends that basically any content which is kind of highlighted as red is shown as not cited or quoted. Any content highlighted in yellow is showing as missing a citation. So the way in which we can, I suppose, navigate through the analysis reports, there's a couple of different ways of doing so. One thing which we can do is we can simply scroll through the reports or the student content over on the left-hand side. If there's any area that which has been identified as potential plagiarism and we'd like to know a little bit more about, we can simply click on it. And what it will do here is on the right-hand side, it will show where the instance of plagiarism detection, potential plagiarism detection rather, has been picked up. An alternative way of doing that is if we want to, what we can do is instead of going through this kind of bit by bit, something which we can do is you'll notice over on the right-hand side here, over in the right-hand column, there is options in terms of the percentage or kind of the score against particular sources. So for example, in this paper, what Turnitin is suggesting is that 5% of the overall similarity score has come from this one source for rm.ceo.int. What we can do if we want to is we can click on that, and then we can use the arrows here to move through the various instances in the student's work where this has come up. If we want to as well, we can also click on the sources option up here. And from here, we get a similar kind of breakdown just in terms of 5% of this, of the 30% is coming from this source, 2% is coming from this source, so on and so forth. Now, what's useful here is if, based on what the student is writing about, if the student's work is showing up, or if the student kind of, because of the nature of the assessment, has had to draw extensively upon a particular source or a particular article or a particular paper, so on and so forth, very often Turnitin can show an excessively high plagiarism detection score. So for example, for this particular assignment, maybe I asked the students to extensively reference this particular source. So if I find that this is repeatedly coming up and I'm confident that there isn't an instance of plagiarism here, what I can do is I can either click in the match groups, and I can click, if I click here, I can click on exclude match to remove kind of individual instances. So for example, I'm satisfied that this doesn't constitute plagiarism, so I can hit exclude match one by one. Or else what I can do is I can go into the sources space and I can click on the source itself and click on this button here to exclude that source entirely. So that ensures that rm.coi.nt, basically that any kind of results which kind of line up with that aren't counted as plagiarism detection. And you can see as I move through and I exclude particular sources or exclude particular instances, what that will do is that will drop the plagiarism detection score over time. So that's gone from 30% to 28%. If I decide that I want to reestablish those kind of sources, I can simply click on the number of exclusions that I have here, and I can include all the sources, I can include all the text blocks, and that will bring the score back up. In addition to that, within the Turnitin environment, I also have options for a number of filters. So again, we covered this when we were looking at the setup of the assignment. Excuse me. There's a number of options available in terms of, do we want to compare submissions against, for example, student databases, internet content, so on and so forth. And again, we can decide what we want to compare with and against, and simply apply the filters accordingly. There's also a number of exclusion filters which are available here. So for example, excluding bibliography will simply kind of discount any bibliographic material that is in the student's work against, it'll essentially rule that as, okay, we're confident this is not plagiarized material. Similarly, if I decide to exclude quoted text, any text which is contained in quotations, Turnitin is going to make an assumption that that has been properly cited or referenced. Similarly, to exclude cited text and to exclude small matches. So what small matches really means is if, if we decide that, we can set a kind of match exclusion threshold here. So we might say for 5%. And what that means is essentially if there are sources that are less than a certain number of words or a certain percentage, basically Turnitin will kind of exclude those. So for example, if I set this to 5%, anything which is counted at kind of 1% or 2% or 3% would be removed in terms of instances of plagiarism. So I suppose the beneficial thing about all of this is it's possible to turn all of these sources, all of these filters on and off. So what you can do is you can, I suppose, essentially play around with these and kind of see how they affect plagiarism detection score. As I said, probably one of the biggest elements or indicators here really comes down to particular sources. So again, it might be the case that quite a large percentage of the overall similarity score is because a student is referencing one particular source extensively, in which case what you can do is you can go to sources and you can simply exclude particular sources more often than not. That is a way of, if you kind of remove particular kind of sources that students are using extensively, then that tends to bring down the similarity score to a more respectable level. If you want to download the similarity report, you can do so by clicking on the download button up along here. And in addition, you can also use this button if you want to grab any particular information around the similarity report itself. Excuse me. So I'll come to your question in a minute, Nadine, if that's okay. Yeah, so as I mentioned, in terms of the sources against which Turnitin will compare against the standard paper repository, as I mentioned, is Turnitin's kind of global database. The institution paper repository is, I suppose, the local MTU version of that. And there is also the option to not store submitted papers against or not to include any submitted papers into any Turnitin databases. There's a couple of considerations which I'd just like to briefly touch on, and then we might get into the Q&As. So if you do think that there has been a legitimate instance of plagiarism, recommendation is to contact your head of department or your module coordinator in any suspected case of academic misconduct as per the academic honesty and integrity policy. The academic honesty and integrity policy is available at mycat.ie/academic honesty and integrity. In terms of, I suppose, what constitutes a worrying score from a plagiarism detection point of view, there's no solid answer. There's no kind of specific answer. The main element that I think is worth considering here, or the important thing to do here, is to simply look at the plagiarism detection report. There's a lot to be said in terms of just good general common sense in terms of these kind of scenarios. Very often, Turnitin might present quite a high plagiarism detection score for student work. And what you might find, what I have found certainly more often than not, is that that's generally Turnitin being overly punitive or overly cautious. More often than not, it comes from a student who maybe kind of references a lot of existing research or cites a lot of material, but Turnitin doesn't always necessarily pick up on the fact that the student is citing, or maybe the student has, referenced incorrectly, has cited incorrectly. So in terms of any plagiarism detection score, our strong advice would be to simply never to kind of take this as gospel, but to look at the actual student work and to generally it does tend to become quite clear quite quickly whether a student has plagiarized large amounts of material or whether, the plagiarism detection score is quite high simply as a result of the student's you know, maybe not citing correctly or Turnitin kind of picking up on kind of more than it should. Um, but like I said, if there is any concern in terms of you having, or if you think that there has been an instance of plagiarism or breach of academic integrity, generally the recommendation is to contact your course coordinator or head of department, and to review the academic honesty and integrity policy. Anyone who would have used original previously, all of the submissions to original, which we mentioned, are in the process of being migrated into MTU's Turnitin instance. One consideration that comes up is some students, or excuse me, some lecturers wish to, if some lecturers would like for a student, for example, a master's student, or a student doing a master's by research, to be able to submit a draft of, for example, their thesis against a particular to submit a draft of their thesis and to get some kind of feedback in terms of, how much of their material is showing up as plagiarized. So what we don't want here is we don't want a situation where a student submits a draft of their work that is submitted to the Turnitin global repository or the Turnitin or the MTU Turnitin repository, and kind of their work shows up as kind of essentially some form of self-plagiarism. So if you want a student to be able to submit a draft of their work to get an indication of how much of it is showing up as plagiarized, what you can very simply do is you can create an assignment for them, and set the options to not store the submitted paper. So for example, if we just go on here, so the option there would select Turnitin as the plagiarism review, and to ensure that store submission is set to do not store the submitted paper, and that you show the report to students immediately. Now, what this will allow them to do is it will allow them to submit, Turnitin, will show them their plagiarism detection report immediately, and the student can review it. But because we haven't stored the submitted paper, when a student goes to submit their final piece, it means that there won't be any situation arising where self-plagiarism could occur, where a student, you know, their final piece is showing up as 90-odd% plagiarized material because it's comparing it against the draft which they submitted. So hopefully that's somewhat clear. Generally, we try and generally we recommend kind of in a situation like that, setting up a draft and a final submission. The draft submission, the option should be do not store submitted paper and show report to students immediately. And then you set up a second final submission. And if you want to, you can set the student work to be stored in the standard paper repository or institution paper repository, should you so wish. So I see that Roisin has been my colleague Roisin has very kindly been answering kind of any queries. So we might just take a moment just to touch on those briefly before talking about Turnitin and generative AI. So, excuse me, Nadim asked, if I check my research work from the Turnitin as instructor, I hope it does not save the copy to its database, submitting to So essentially, as Roisin has identified, Nadim, the important element, if you don't want Turnitin to save copies of your work or student work to its database, is very simply to set the option when creating a Turnitin assignment to not store the submitted papers. And what that will do is it will ensure that kind of your work or student work is not added to any Turnitin database. An additional query came in as to whether Turnitin can check a file ending in mang.dotx. Generally, that can depend. There are, Turnitin, I suppose, generally Turnitin is designed to work with more popular kind of submissions or file formats, excuse me, things like doc, things like PDF. Even it has some difficulty with PowerPoint sometimes, depending on the nature or kind of how the PowerPoint was put together. So generally, we recommend if you are looking for Turnitin to run plagiarism detection against any kind of work, docs and PDFs tend to be the most popular file formats, or they tend to be the file formats which present the least amount of difficulties. But if you do have any difficulties or any queries around that, you can contact us at edtech@mtu.ie. Okay, so something I'd like to talk briefly about is Turnitin and AI detection. So generally, there are no clear guarantees that any plagiarism detection tool, not just Turnitin, but any plagiarism detection tool will definitely capture instances of GenAI developed content with 100% certainty. So there's a broad range of research out there which would indicate that very simply, any plagiarism detection software will struggle with detecting content which is developed with generative AI tools like ChatGPT or Claude. There's a number of reasons for this, but again, there does seem to be all recent reputable research certainly does indicate that, regardless of what any software says it can do, detecting instances of content which has been generated with tools like ChatGPT is very simply not feasible. There's a number of different reasons for this. Without getting too deep into them, tools such as ChatGPT allowed for advanced prompt engineering. There is unlimited rephrasing capacity, which means that kind of you can ask something like ChatGPT to rewrite the same content as many different times as possible in as many different ways as possible. But there is also the option for students to very simply use ChatGPT to generate content and then essentially write the content out as in the student's own words. In addition, there's a whole other kind of marketplace of products and services which are designed to kind of make AI generated content sound more kind of naturally written. They're in the kind of background to all of this as well is just the ongoing kind of very advanced rate of development of Gen AI tools and platforms. There is also a consideration when we look at trying to use tools like Turnitin to identify content which has been developed by tools like ChatGPT, instances of false positives. So the idea that Turnitin or a similar tool could analyze a piece of student work which the student has developed entirely themselves, and the danger of something like Turnitin going, yeah, this has been developed using using tools like ChatGPT, even when the content hasn't been. So obviously there's been a whole range of different kind of newspaper stories where students would have been, failed particular modules because an instructor is paranoid that content was developed using something like ChatGPT, even when it wasn't. So because, because plagiarism detection software is not really effective, according to all existing research, in terms of detecting content which is developed using ChatGPT, there are other options available to us. So one thing which can be done, for instance, is setting clear AI assessment parameters for your assessments. And what this very simply means is communicating to students whether you are comfortable allowing them to use tools like ChatGPT for some of the assessment, and if so, what elements of assessment. So, for example, you might say that you are comfortable with students using something like ChatGPT for example, brainstorming, or for example, for idea generation, but not for the development of report content. Equally, you might say that you might identify to students that you're not happy for them to use any generative AI tool to develop any element of their assessment. Another element which can be done which we would recommend, is highlighting the presence of Turnitin. So even if tools like Turnitin cannot guarantee that they can detect content developed using generative AI tools, communicating to students that content will be kind of run through Turnitin, that it will be compared against Turnitin's repository, can often be quite a strong deterrent in terms of students using generative AI tools. In addition, something there's a lot of elements of assessment which tools like generative AI do not do well. So, for example, something which can be done without the need for a complete redesign of an assessment is, for example, um, focusing or marking more on the process of the overall assessment as opposed to entirely just on the final outcome of the assessment. Tools like are kind of using resources like rubrics, which can emphasize elements like personal reflection or the use of real world data or so on and so forth. These are all things that tools like ChatGPT do not do particularly well. So, minor elements of assessment redesign or just orientating the assessment and the marking of the assessment in a particular way can be very useful as an alternative to trying to use something like Turnitin to actually catch out any use of tools like ChatGPT. And in general, simply talking to students, we would recommend, is a very important and kind of fundamental element. So in terms of their use of any AI tool. So very simply talking to students about generative AI tools like ChatGPT, that can be a very, I suppose, effective means of kind of communicating to students kind of the potential use of these tools, kind of how they benefit or do not benefit students, and kind of students' own concerns around the use of these tools also. In addition to all of that, something which the Department of TEL and our colleagues in Kerry EDSU are planning to do over the coming semester is a closed pilot of a feature in Turnitin which looks at AI detection. So there is an AI detection feature in Turnitin, and what we're interested in doing is essentially doing a closed pilot over the coming semester to try and collectively examine its effectiveness or its lack thereof, in what ways it could be relied upon, what elements of it would be less reliable, and whether it is something which would be of benefit to the university. And the intention of doing a closed pilot is very simply for us as a university to test this feature out and to make a determination whether it brings value or what dangers it could bring in terms of, as I mentioned, instances of false positives. So the intention of a closed pilot is very simply to try and determine, benefits it would bring, what elements it would be effective at, what limitations are there, so on and so forth. So what we will be doing over the coming semester is essentially putting out a call, looking for volunteers from MTU staff to engage in this closed pilot. In addition, we will also here in TEL, we're also planning a range of Gen AI activities over the coming semester. So that includes more training, live and asynchronous training sessions around Gen AI and AI literacy. And we are also going to be holding a seminar series. So we're going to be getting in a range of very established and reputable guest speakers to talk to MTU staff about the whole area of Gen AI and the impact that it can and may have on us as a university, but also on, I suppose, the graduates that MTU is going to be producing. In terms of Turnitin, if you have any queries, there is a help center available for Turnitin, so helpcenter.turnitin.com. And what that will allow you to do is access a number of different resources in terms of how to use Turnitin, but it also has the option there for you to submit a request. So if you're having any difficulty with Turnitin, you can contact Turnitin support directly. Additionally, we also have developed our own series of help articles around Turnitin, which is available on our help center. If in any doubt, you can go to tel.cit.ie. And from here, if you go to staff resources, there is links there to whole range of different kind of resources for staff, including the help docs and articles that I mentioned, our YouTube channel, and also you can email our help desk at edtech@mtu.ie. So just before we finish up, can I ask, does anybody have any questions? If you do, maybe please put them into the Q&A for anyone joining live over Zoom. Anyone watching on YouTube, please feel free to put it into the live chat. And equally, even if you don't have any questions, maybe just let us know in the Q&A section that you're okay. Okay, well, I think we can take that as a sign that everybody is happy. Thanks very much, Emmett. All that's left to do is very simply to say thanks everyone for your time and attention and for coming along to the session today. We hope it was of some use. And as I mentioned, we'll be doing a whole additional series of events and activities around this over the coming semester. So hope to see you at more of these sessions. So thanks very much, everyone, and take care.